Okay, so get this. Hollywood is buzzing about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, but this time it's not about box office numbers.
Oh.
No, this is a whole different kind of drama.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
We are diving deep into a seriously messy legal situation, all stemming from their movie. It Ends With Us.
That's the one based on the Colleen Hoover novel, right? The one that explores domestic violence and all those tough relationship choices.
That's the one. The film adaptation itself actually got some negative press, with critics and fans wondering if it really did justice to those sensitive topics in the book.
Yeah, I remember some of that chatter online.
But what's really grabbing headlines are the dueling lawsuits and accusations flying back and forth between Lively and Baldoni.
Oh, wow. So it's gone full legal battle. That's pretty intense.
It is. And that's exactly why we are doing this deep dive.
Makes sense. So what are we looking at? What kind of sources do we have to untangle this mess?
Well, you've sent over a mountain of court documents and legal statements from both sides,
Oh, yes, I did.
plus a ton of media coverage, so we've got a lot to sort through.
All right, so what's the mission? What are we trying to figure out in this deep dive?
We are going to untangle this web and try to get to the bottom of what is really going on.
Sounds like a puzzle where everyone's claiming to have the right pieces, but they're all from different pictures.
Exactly. Perfect analogy. So let's start with Lively's side of the story. She filed a lawsuit against Baldoni, claiming sexual harassment went down during the filming of It Ends With Us.
Okay, and what are the specifics there? What's she alleging?
Well, she is alleging some pretty specific instances of misconduct.
Like what? Give me an example.
For example, she claims Baldoni would show her nude images and videos of women.
Ooh, hold on. Just to be clear, Lively didn't just come out publicly with this, right?
No, you're right. She initially actually filed a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department.
Oh, okay, so she tried to go through proper channels first.
Right, and then it later escalated to a federal lawsuit.
I see. So in her legal filing, she's claiming these visuals contributed to a hostile work environment.
That's a part of it, yeah. She also alleges that Baldoni would often bring up his own sexual experiences.
And she found that inappropriate and unprofessional, I'm assuming.
Yes, and there's another layer to all of this, too. Lively claims that Baldoni tried to insert extra sex scenes into the film.
Really? Sex scenes that weren't in the original script.
That's what she's claiming, which she says added to this overall feeling of harassment on set.
So it's not just isolated incidents she's describing, but a kind of pattern of behavior that made her uncomfortable.
Exactly. So we've got Lively claiming harassment based on these specific actions she's alleging and an overall uncomfortable environment. But then Baldoni fires back with a countersuit, right?
Ah, so that's where the dueling lawsuits come in.
Right.
And what's his side of the story? What's the basis of his countersuit?
Well, essentially, Baldoni's countersuit claims that Lively is making these accusations to try and save her own image, especially after all the negative press the film received.
So he's saying this is all about reputation management, that she's using the lawsuit as a PR move.
That's Baldoni's claim. He alleges that Lively orchestrated these accusations to shift public attention away from the firm's criticisms and put the spotlight on him instead.
So he's essentially claiming she's trying to control the narrative.
That's his argument.
Wow, okay, so both sides are making some pretty serious claims here.
They are.
But with these accusations going back and forth, how does the legal system even begin to sort through all of this?
That is a really good question, and it's something the judge in this case recognized, too. He saw how easily public opinion could influence things.
Makes sense, especially with a case like this that's already generating a lot of media attention.
Exactly. It's like a courtroom drama that's also playing out in the media. So to prevent things from spiraling even more out of control, the judge actually issues something called a gag order.
A gag order? So what exactly does that mean?
Well, it means that both Lively and Baldoni, as well as their entire legal teams, are barred from talking to the press about the case.
So it's basically like hitting the mute button on any public statements about the case.
That's a good way to put it. The judge wants to stop anything that could potentially sway the jury.
Makes sense. Keep things focused on the legal proceedings and not the media frenzy.
Exactly. But even before the gag order, things were already getting pretty heated in the media, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, has been pretty vocal.
Yeah, he has. What's his take on all of this?
Well, he claims that Lively's team actually started a media campaign against his client.
Oh, really? So it's not just about the legal case, there's a PR battle happening too.
Right. Friedman even went so far as to accuse Lively's side of working with the New York Times to publish an article that painted Baldoni in a negative light.
So he's saying they struck first in the court of public opinion, trying to shape the narrative early on.
Exactly.
And how has he responded to all of this?
Well, he's clearly frustrated that people are jumping to conclusions before all the facts come out in court.
I can see why he'd be upset about that.
He actually wants to speed up the trial process, hoping to clear his client's name as soon as possible.
Wow, that's a bold move.
But Lively's lawyer, Michael Gottlieb, isn't just sitting back quietly. He's fired back at Friedman's accusations.
So what's his argument? How is he defending Lively?
Well, Gottlieb argues that Friedman is trying to play the victim card to manipulate how the public sees this whole thing.
So he's saying Friedman is using this to undermine Lively's credibility.
That's right. He claims Friedman's statements are just a distraction tactic.
It's a war of words, not just in the courtroom, but in the media as well.
It really is. But beyond all these legal tactics and PR maneuvers, what are the real consequences for Lively and Baldoni? What's actually at stake here?
Well, for one thing, both sides are claiming hundreds of millions of dollars in damages due to damage to their reputations.
Oh, wow, hundreds of millions. That's not chump change.
No, it's not. So this isn't just about clearing their names. There's serious money on the line, too.
It seems like this case could have a huge impact on both their careers and their finances.
It definitely could. And that raises another question, too. Are these claims about financial damage just part of a legal strategy, or are they really reflecting the damage that's been done? It's hard to tell at this point.
It's like we're watching a legal thriller unfold, but the lines between truth, strategy, and image are super blurred.
I agree. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
So before we move on, what are the key things we should be keeping in mind as we dive deeper into this case? What stands out to you so far?
Well, I think the biggest thing to remember is this is a he said, she said situation with super high stakes. We've got two very different accounts of what happened, and it's going to be up to the legal system to figure out where the truth lies.
Right. And we can't forget the huge role that public opinion is playing in all of this.
Absolutely. It's a case that's already generating a ton of buzz, and it's going to be interesting to see how public perception evolves as more information comes to light.
You know, it's fascinating how this case really brings up that question of how do we actually figure out the truth when it's one person's word against another's?
Yeah, it's a classic dilemma.
Especially when you throw in the whole Hollywood element and this massive pressure to keep up a certain image.
It's a whole other layer of complexity, isn't it?
It really is.
Right.
And the judge clearly saw how easily public opinion could influence things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is why he issued that gag order, right?
Trying to create some space for the legal process to actually play out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To keep things focused on the actual evidence and arguments.
Right, not the media frenzy surrounding the case.
Because, let's be real, the media loves a good Hollywood scandal.
They do.
So I'm actually curious, have we seen these gag orders used in other celebrity cases?
Yeah, they're not uncommon,
Oh, really?
especially in these high-profile cases where there's concern about the media potentially influencing the jury.
Right, because if everyone's already formed an opinion based on what they're seeing in the news, it's hard to have a fair trial.
Exactly. Do you remember that Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial?
Oh, yeah, that one was everywhere.
That was another example where the court tried to limit how much the media and social media could influence things.
Right, because even if you weren't following the trial, you couldn't escape it. It was everywhere you looked.
Exactly, and that's what makes these gag orders so tricky.
How so?
Well, you can try to control what's being said in court, but it's almost impossible to completely control the flow of information in the age of social media.
Right, people are going to talk no matter what.
People are constantly sharing their opinions and interpretations of events online, regardless of what any court says.
So even with the judge trying to manage the situation, there's still that parallel trial happening online.
It's a court of public opinion, and it can be pretty harsh.
I bet. That must be incredibly stressful for both Lively and Baldoni, knowing that their reputations are being debated online, even with limited information available.
It's got to be a constant pressure cooker.
Especially in Hollywood, where your image is everything.
Right. It's not just about the legal outcome. It's about how this case will impact their careers, their future projects, their whole standing in the industry.
It's like they're fighting a battle on two fronts, in the courtroom and online.
It really is. But even with all the media drama, at the end of the day, this case is going to come down to the actual evidence presented in court, right?
That's where things get real.
And that's where things also get even more complicated.
In what way?
Well, in a case like this, where it's basically one person's word against another's, the evidence is often circumstantial, subjective, open to interpretation.
So it's not always clear-cut.
Not at all. So let's talk about the evidence. What exactly are we dealing with here? What kind of evidence will the judge and jury be considering?
Yeah, let's break that down.
What has Lively's team presented to support her claims?
Well, from what we can tell from those court documents you sent over, it seems like Lively's team is focused on establishing a pattern of behavior.
Okay, a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, they've submitted this very detailed timeline of incidents,
With specifics.
right, including specific examples of what they're calling inappropriate comments, unwanted touching, and instances where she felt pressured by Baldoni.
But if it's mostly Lively's word against Baldoni's, how do you prove those kinds of allegations?
That's a good question. I mean, it seems really hard to provide concrete evidence for every claim.
You're right, it is a challenge.
So what do you do?
In cases like this, it often becomes a question of credibility.
So who do you believe?
The judge and jury will have to look at the testimony from both sides, assess their demeanor, and consider any other supporting evidence that might be available.
Okay, so is there any supporting evidence?
That's what both legal teams are digging into right now.
Like what?
Witnesses, for example.
Yeah.
Or emails, text messages, anything that could back up their client's story.
So they're basically doing a full investigation.
They're trying to uncover anything that could help their case. And this is where the skill of the lawyers really comes in. They have to sift through a ton of information, identify those key pieces of evidence, and then present them in a way that's convincing to the judge and jury.
Right, because they need to build a strong case.
Exactly. So it's not just about finding the evidence, it's about presenting it effectively.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about Baldoni's side? How are they planning to counter Lively's claims?
Well, Baldoni's legal team has been very aggressive.
In what way?
They're calling Lively's accusations completely fabricated.
So they're flat out denying it.
They're going to try to poke holes in Lively's story.
Like highlight inconsistency.
Exactly. Point out any discrepancies in her timeline or her memory of events.
So they're going to attack her credibility?
They might also try to suggest that she's motivated by something else.
Like what?
Maybe personal gain. Suggesting she's using these allegations to boost her career or deflect attention from the negative press around the film.
So it's not just about proving Baldoni's innocence. It's also about discrediting Lively.
That's a common strategy in these types of cases.
Even if they can't definitively prove that Baldoni didn't do anything wrong, they can try to create doubt about Lively's accusations.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes game of strategy and persuasion.
And with so much on the line, both sides are going to be pulling out all the stops.
They will. But even with all the legal maneuvering and all the media attention at its core, this case comes down to one question. Who do you believe?
It's a question of whose story is more believable.
And that's what makes these cases so challenging and so fascinating.
It's not always about finding the absolute truth.
Sometimes it's about weighing different perspectives, trying to assess credibility, and making judgments based on the evidence we have.
It's a reminder that our legal system isn't perfect.
It's not. And cases like this bring that to the forefront.
They make us think about fairness, about justice, about whether the system can really deliver a just outcome.
It's a lot to grapple with.
It is.
Yeah.
And then when you add in the Hollywood factor and the public's fascination with celebrity drama and the influence of social media, it becomes even more complex.
It becomes this whirlwind of opinions and emotions.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it forces us to question our own biases, our own assumptions about truth.
It's a good reminder that things aren't always black and white.
And that sometimes the truth is a lot more complicated than we might think. It's crazy how this whole thing has become this public spectacle.
I know, right?
I mean, we're talking about serious allegations, legal strategies, potentially massive financial consequences.
Yeah.
But it's all playing out on this huge public stage with everyone weighing in.
It really shows you the unique challenges celebrities face when they're going through legal battles.
Because it's not just the legal system they have to deal with.
Right. They're dealing with the court of public opinion, too.
And that can be just as brutal.
It's like living under a microscope.
Seriously.
Every single thing they do or say, every post online gets analyzed and judged.
In this case, it feels like it's tapping into some bigger conversations that are happening right now.
Definitely.
Especially around power dynamics and the hashtag #MeToo movement.
It's all happening against that backdrop, right?
This societal reckoning we're going through.
With abuse of power and holding people accountable.
Especially in places like Hollywood.
Where those traditional power structures have often protected abusers and silenced victims.
And now with social media, victims have these new platforms to share their stories.
And demand justice.
Which is powerful.
It is.
But it's also kind of a double-edged sword, right?
It is, because social media can amplify voices that haven't been heard.
But it can also create this echo chamber.
Where accusations are treated as facts and reputations are ruined without due process.
which is dangerous.
It is. So how do we navigate this new world where social media has so much influence?
That's the question, isn't it?
How do we make sure accusations are taken seriously?
Without rushing to judgment or having these trials by social media?
That's a tough one. It's complicated.
No easy answers.
But I think it starts with media literacy.
Being able to think critically about the information we're consuming.
Exactly.
Questioning things, considering different perspectives.
Recognizing that an accusation isn't the same as a conviction.
It makes you think about the impact this whole case could have on Hollywood in general.
Yeah, for sure.
Will it make people more cautious, more transparent, or will it create this environment of fear and mistrust where people are afraid to speak up?
Hard to say, but these kinds of cases definitely shake things up.
I hope it leads to more open conversations,
Me too.
more accountability,
Yeah.
a real commitment to creating safer working environments for everyone.
That's the goal.
It's going to take a lot of work, though.
It will. Studios, producers, actors,
Yeah.
everyone needs to be a part of it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this legal battle, what are the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think this case really highlights how law, media, and public perception are all intertwined.
They're inseparable these days.
Legal battles aren't just happening in courtrooms anymore.
They're happening in the media, on social media.
In the court of public opinion.
This case also makes us think about power dynamics,
Especially in places like Hollywood.
where those power imbalances can create these environments that are ripe for abuse.
And finally, it reminds us that we have to be careful about how we approach accusations.
Right.
Remembering due process, recognizing that truth can be complicated and messy.
Well said. And in the end, it's up to the legal system to figure out the facts and make a judgment.
Right.
But the court of public opinion, that's a verdict that's always changing.
Based on what information is out there and the conversations people are having.
So it's our responsibility to stay informed, to think critically,
To engage in thoughtful discussions.
and to remember that even in the most heated cases, there are real people involved.
With real lives and real reputations at stake.
So keep diving deep. Keep asking questions. Keep having those important conversations.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.